The bone chimes. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, Mrs. Adler was the kind of old woman no one really noticed. She lived at the end of a street, in a creaky old house surrounded by tall, tangled hedges that seemed to block her off from the rest of the world. She kept to herself mostly, but she had a reputation for giving gifts to the neighbors, especially wind chimes. Odd little creations they were, delicate, handcrafted, and eerily beautiful. They tinkled in the breeze, a haunting musical sound that seemed almost too perfect, too clear. The neighborhood loved them, hanging them on their porches and windows, admiring her craftsmanship. Mrs. Adler's gifts were always free, a gesture of kindness from the sweet old lady at the end of the road. No one ever questioned it. No one asked where she got the bones for her wind chimes. But Timmy Thompson, a curious 12-year-old boy with a wild imagination, did. He had seen something strange one night. A flicker of movement through Mrs. Adler's window while riding his bike home late after his friend's house. He had heard the rumors, how the neighborhood pets had been disappearing for months. Cats, dogs, rabbits, all gone without a trace. His own dog, Rusty, had vanished a few weeks back. His mom said Rusty probably ran off to chase squirrels, but Timmy knew better. Rusty wouldn't leave him like that. And he couldn't shake the odd feeling he had about Mrs. Adler. It started with the sounds at night. Lying in bed, Timmy would sometimes hear it. The soft, eerie clinking of bone against bone. It wasn't just the chimes hanging from the neighbors' porches. It was something deeper, heavier. A sound that carried through the air like a secret, beckoning him to listen closer. One night, after lying in bed for hours with that strange noise haunting him, Timmy decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and his courage, he snuck out of his house and made his way down the street. The wind was still, but the night was alive with whispers. Leaves rustling, crickets chirping, and there, on the edge of it all, that familiar chime. It led him to Mrs. Adler's house. He crouched by her hedge, peeking through the cracks in the thick branches. The house loomed in the darkness, a shadowy figure against the sky, but something caught his eye. A light from her back porch, and there, beneath the light, was Mrs. Adler. Timmy froze. She was hunched over a table, her long, gnarled fingers working quickly, threading string through tiny, delicate bones. His heart stopped as he realized what he was seeing. Bones. Small bones. Animal bones. Timmy watched in horror as she picked up a tiny skull, a cat's skull, and attached it to the top of the wind chime she was making. The soft clink of the bones echoed through the night, a hollow, haunting sound that chilled him to the bone. He knew it then. The truth. The old woman wasn't just some sweet lady who made gifts. She was a monster. And she had Rusty. He wanted to scream, to run, but his legs felt like they were made of lead. He watched, helpless as she worked, her eyes gleaming in the dim light, muttering to herself as she added the final touches to her latest creation. The wind chime glimmered in her hands. A delicate nightmare of polished bones strung together in perfect harmony. When she finished, she held it up to the light, admiring her handiwork. Then she looked up. Timmy's heart stopped as her eyes met his through the hedges. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. Her face twisted into a smile, a horrible, toothy grin that sent a wave of nausea crashing over him. Slowly, she put down the wind chime and began to walk toward him, her footsteps unnaturally soft, like she was gliding over the grass. Timmy stumbled back, his legs finally moving, but it was too late. Mrs. Adler was already at the hedge, her bony fingers curling around the branches. "Out for a midnight stroll, dear?" she crooned, her voice sickly sweet, dripping with malice. "Or are you looking for something?" Timmy's voice caught in his throat. He shook his head, stepping back. She chuckled, a low, rasping sound. "I see you've been listening to my chimes. Lovely, aren't they? So much life in them, wouldn't you say? She took another step closer, and in the moonlight, Timmy saw the glint of her necklace, made of tiny bones strung together with sinew. His stomach churned. "Wait, where's Rusty?" Timmy managed to croak out, his voice shaking. Her smile widened. "Ah, Rusty, such a good boy. He made a beautiful addition to my collection." She gestured to the wind chimes hanging from her porch, where something dark and familiar swung gently in the night breeze. Timmy's blood turned to ice. The wind chimes on her porch, the bones, they weren't just random animals. They were his dog, his Rusty. He took a step back, panic rising in his chest. He had to get out of there. He had to tell someone. But Mrs. Adler was faster than she looked. Before he could run, her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with a grip like iron. Her nails dug into his skin, and she leaned in close, her breath hot against his ear. "You shouldn't have come here, boy," she hissed, her voice dropping to a cold, threatening whisper. "You've seen too much." Timmy yanked his arm free and bolted, sprinting down the street as fast as his legs could carry him. He didn't look back, didn't dare. The sound of the wind chimes followed him, that awful, hollow clinking echoing in his ears long after he made it home. He told his parents, the police, anyone who would listen, but no one believed him. They thought he was just a scared kid with an overactive imagination. Mrs. Adler? Sweet old Mrs. Adler? She couldn't possibly be doing anything wrong, but Timmy knew the truth. And every night, as he lay in bed, he could still hear them. The wind chimes, whispering their horrible secrets, promising that Mrs. Adler wasn't finished with him yet. Not by a long shot.